Well, here we go again. Another Joola video and another new paddle. If you have been following my channel or just pickleball news in general, I am sure you are aware of the drama around Joola this year. Firstly though, these videos do take me a good amount of time, and I do hope I am providing you all with some good value. I would greatly appreciate if you would subscribe to help support my channel, as well as give this video and others I post a like. Thank you again, and back to the video. I first reviewed the original Gen 3 Magnus a few months back with very high praise. Then, the USAP comes out and announces that these paddles are delisted. Then Joola sues the USAP, and we are waiting to see how that's going to play out. Then Joola released the Mod TA15, which is only available in the Perseus shape, and it was only allowed to be released kind of through a loophole with the USAP because it was the original paddle that the USAP did originally approve. I then reviewed that paddle also with very high praise because it is identical to the original Gen 3 Perseus. Then we see the governing body of the MLP and PPA come out with their own paddle approval governing body for the sport called the UPAA. And so far, the first and only paddles approved by the UPAA are the newly released Joola Gen 3 S's. So are they actually different than the original Gen 3s and the Mod TA15? Yes they are, but very minimally. When I first got my Joola Gen 3S Perseus, I couldn't tell the difference at all. But with more playtesting over the past few weeks and switching between the paddles between games, you do notice slight differences. I'm gonna throw some stats up on the screen while I talk through what I found. Also, if you have ever played a Gen 3 Perseus or the Mod TA15, the dimensions are exactly the same. Simply put, this paddle still plays amazing. The easiest way to describe the difference is that the original Gen 3 and Mod TA15s feel like you are playing with a tennis racket with very loose strings, and the Gen 3S feels like the same tennis racket, but only if you tighten those strings. Meaning the original two lines of paddles released feel like you have a bit more power, and the tighter face of the Gen 3S feels like you have a little bit more control while still having plenty of power. I did notice a small drop off in power and spin from the original releases to the newly released Gen 3S's. However, I still feel like the Gen 3S's had top tier spin and power, and it still feels like it gives me an edge over my competition when hitting my drives and serves. I joked about this in my Mod TA15 video, but the Apple naming scheme of just adding the S to the end of the product name is actually very fitting here. Often what Apple used to do was take the phone that they released the previous year and make small improvements to it before releasing an altogether new phone. We would see this with the iPhone 6 to the iPhone 6S, and I would say that is the best comparison here. The original Gen 3s were great, and maybe you still prefer them, but the new Gen 3S is a refined version of that paddle that I think is a very well-rounded solid paddle. Also, Chris Olsen over at Pickleball Studio broke some news earlier this week that Joola admitted that their Gen 2, Gen 3, and Mod TA15 paddles were intentionally shipped with a compromised core. What this means is that when the paddles are being built, Joola was placing a 17mm thick core into a 16mm thick mold in the thermoforming process, causing there to be a slightly crushed core out of the box, which would explain why Joola is known for having some major issues with core crushing. This also explains why the original Gen 3s have so much power and really feel like you are loading a diving board in big swings. What this does not explain is why the Gen 2s didn't benefit from this, and maybe it just comes down to the added foam cores in the Gen 3s. This also brings up a bigger question of how many companies are intentionally doing this with the hopes that their paddles will last long enough to where you are ready to move on to a new paddle and still get the benefits from the slightly crushed core out of the box. I personally am not a fan of this business practice on tops of once the core is fully crushed or compromised, the paddle is often unplayable. What is even more troubling is that Joola claims that these slightly core crushed paddles still pass deflection tests by both organizations. However, Joola is claiming that this is no longer the case with the Gen 3S's, which explains why the face feels a bit tighter. I personally really do enjoy this feeling, and my shots around the kitchen and my backhand flicks have greatly benefited from it. This is a lot to be processing for your average pickleball player, when it should be as simple as, here's this great new paddle that follows the rules and is going to provide you with no issues, and it's going to last, especially given the high price tag. With all of that being said, this is a fantastic paddle, but it definitely isn't quite as special as the original Gen 3s in terms of being drastically different from other paddles on the market. This paddle is very similar to the PaddleTech Bantam 12.7, just with a bigger sweet spot and a touch more power. What I am very interested in is seeing how the market will react to these Joolas with the upcoming release of the Rhombus Ripple. At the end of the day, all of the paddles that Joola has released in last year play fairly similarly. The issue boils down to understanding it all. If you like the original Gen 3 Perseus and want that paddle back, you have the Mod TA15 offered in a 14 and 16mm option. If you played the Magnus, Scorpion, or Hyperion shape, you would have to turn to the Gen 3S lineup, with all of the original Gen 3 paddles being banned from all tournament play. The only issue is that the Gen 3S lineup is only approved for UPAA tournaments, meaning as of now, your only safe bet for tournament play with these paddles are PPA events. Any APP or local tournaments are likely not going to allow these paddles in competition, at least for now. It really all comes down to who you are playing against and where. If you are just a local rec player, you of course can use the original Gen 3 paddles, but you may run the risk of people being upset or saying that that paddle is illegal. I am not here to say what is right or wrong for rec play, but I do want to be transparent about the factors for each paddle. In this review, I hope I was able to provide some clarity on everything going on with Joola and their paddle lineup. At the end of the day, pickleball is meant to be fun, and hopefully we can get back to that soon. If you have played with a Joola Gen 3 paddle, let me know how you are feeling about all this down in the comments. I also would love to know if anyone has given you a hard time for using Joola paddles. Lastly, if you have any questions or feedback, I'll make sure to answer all of the questions down in the comment section. Other than that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.